Welcome back, everyone. We are reading, I think, the fifth part now of the Paninis of Pompeii. At the Baths. Now, Caecilius was a person who lived way back in ancient Roman times. I probably haven't mentioned that before, but it's true. In fact, all these stories are set in ancient Roman times, in a town called Pompeii, and they are illustrated for your pleasure by a man named Sholto Walker. Hey Sholto, draw another square for me. I can totally make Sholto draw squares any time I like. Now, did you know that baths were very important to the ancient Romans? Well, they were. Not just little baths like you or I have, but extraordinary public baths where all the men and women of the town would go. They would bathe together in the health-giving waters, the men in one section of the building and the women in quite another. And more than this, the baths were a crucial part of Roman social life, a place where tall tales were told and scandalous gossip was gossiped and all sorts of enjoyable pastimes were indulged in. Throwing spoons as high into the air as possible, for example, or trying to irritate the vulture. So anyway, one day Caecilius was sitting around the Pompeii baths having a bit of a gossip with his ugly friend Atrium. They were about 400 other guys there as well, all completely naked. Filius was there completely naked. Also, Barcus Wolferinicum was there. He was the only one wearing clothes, because the rules of the baths clearly stated that all the men had to be naked, but all the dogs had to wear clothes. So Barcus Wolferinicum was wearing his favourite dress. Actually, it might not have been his favourite dress. Actually, he wasn't at the baths at all. I was mistaken. I thought he was there, but he wasn't. Actually, he was there in a way. He was there in Filius's thoughts, because as everyone lay around the baths throwing spoons into the air and trying to irritate the vulture, Filius was thinking about Barcus Wolferinicum. I like Barcus Wolferinicum. He is a nice dog, Filius was thinking. Quiet your thoughts, my lad, laughed Caecilius, turning down the volume on Filius's brain from 7 to 3. I am trying to have a gossip with Atrium, and I can't hardly hear what he has to say with you thinking of Barcus Wolferinicum all the time. Now, what was it you were saying, Atrium? Well, replied Atrium. And not only did he throw a spoon into the air, but when it came down, it landed on the vulture's head, so that it counted as 2 pastimes for the price of 1. I shall tell you what I was saying, Caecilius, but I am afraid you must not call me Atrium any more, because whilst you were speaking to Filius just now, I changed my name to Frolicus. Did you really? Said Caecilius in astonishment. Well then, Frolicus, what was it you were saying? I am afraid I cannot answer that question, replied Atrium/Frolicus, because just before you asked me that question, I changed my name again. This time to Maltus Vinegarus. What sport is this? Laughed Caecilius, fondly stroking Atrium/Frolicus's/Maltus Vinegarus's curly hair. Well then, Maltus Vinegarus, I ask you now, what was it you were going to tell me? Too slow, laughed Caecilius's companion, for I have changed my name to Barcus Wolferinicum. This is getting very tiresome, Caecilius whispered to Filius. I think Atrium has gone mad. Shall we go to the honey room? Now, the honey room was one of the finest rooms in the whole of the public baths. It was just a room, but it was called the honey room, so it felt more special than the other rooms. Okay, said Filius, but he happened to glance at his father's magnificent hairy chest and let out a horrified poo. Father, exclaimed Filius, what has become of the Julius Caesar pendant you always wear around your neck? For it has disappeared as quickly as a bowl of olives and nuts set before a hungry senator. Drat and figs! Shouted Caecilius so loudly that the walls of the public baths came tumbling down, killing 30 people. He quickly shouted, to make the walls come tumbling up again. Most of the people came back to life as well, except for a couple of old men whose bodies were so frail that they were unable to reassemble themselves in time. Drat and figs, said Caecilius, speaking more quietly. There is only one explanation. A nimble-fingered thief walks among us, yes, here at the public baths, where I did think all men were equal. If any man stole my pendant, or if any man does know who is the cur responsible, let him stand up now and admit the crime, for this is ancient Rome. I mean, it's Pompeii, but you know, it's ancient Roman times, and this sort of thing is uncivilized. Then Caecilius went up to one man and said, "We are not flies buzzing around a pot of old goat meat trying to get a sniff. We are civilized men, and we shall not stand for this sort of errant behaviour." And then he went up to another man and said, "We are not flies buzzing around a pot of old goat meat trying to get a sniff. We are civilized men, and we shall not stand for this sort of errant behaviour." Then he went up to a third man and said, "We are not flies buzzing around a pot of old goat meat trying to get a sniff. We are civilized men, and we shall not stand for this sort of errant behaviour." Then he went up to a fourth man and said, "We are not flies buzzing around a pot of old goat meat trying to get a sniff. We are civilized men, and we shall not stand for this sort of errant behaviour." In this way, Caecilius approached all the men in the place, nearly 400 in all, and to each one he said, "We are not flies buzzing around a pot of old goat meat trying to get a sniff. We are civilized men, and we shall not stand for this sort of errant behaviour." This took over 2 hours, and it was only afterwards that Caecilius realised he should have just said, "We are not flies buzzing around a pot of old goat meat trying to get a sniff. We are civilized men, and we shall not stand for this sort of errant behaviour." Only once, but loud enough so that everyone could hear in one go. So Caecilius went back to the first man and said to him, "I am sorry that took so long. I should have said, 'We are not flies buzzing around a pot of old goat meat trying to get a sniff. We are civilized men, and we shall not stand for this sort of errant behaviour,' once, so that everyone could hear, instead of saying it quietly to each man in turn. So he went up to the second man and said, "I am sorry it took so long. I should have just said, 'We are not flies buzzing around a pot of old goat meat trying to get a sniff. We are civilized men, and we shall not stand for this sort of errant behaviour,' once, so that everyone could hear, instead of saying it quietly to each man in turn. And then on to the third man, and so on. This took another 3 hours, and it was only afterwards that Caecilius realised he should have just said, "I am sorry that took so long. I should have just said, 'We are not flies buzzing around a pot of old goat meat trying to get a sniff. We are civilized men, and we shall not stand for this sort of errant behaviour,' once, so that everyone could hear, instead of saying it quietly to each man in turn, once only, instead of saying it to each man in turn." "Okay, I realised I've just wasted about 5 hours, said Caecilius. "Sorry about that." "And in that time, more objects have disappeared," cried Atrium, who had changed his name back to Atrium again. "See, my marriage ring has been stolen." "My golden armband has disappeared," shouted a thick-set fellow by the name of Wallopus. "And someone has taken my 200-foot statue of a swan," exclaimed Phileas. "Then it is just as I thought," declared Caecilius. "We have a thief amongst us. Lock the doors, imperial shoemakers." So the imperial shoemakers, so called because they were in charge of locking and unlocking doors to the public baths, locked the doors, and then Caecilius reared up to his full height and said impressively, "Look at me, I have reared up to my full height. Now, who is the thief?" "It is not I," declared Walpus. "Nor I," asserted Phileas. "And it cannot possibly be I," said Atrium, "because, well, it could be, I suppose, but it's not." "And it is not I," shouted a small name by the man of small supporting characterus. "Nor I," yelled small supporting characterus's brother of small supporting characterus. "I am not a thief," bellowed Bellonicus, the great merchant. "Nor I," protested Just Make Him Uppercus. And it was specifically not me. I am bloatedly impositor, protested another man called Mispronouncicus. One by one, Caecilius's fellow bathers stepped forward to protest their innocence, until finally Caecilius' suspicious eye landed on a miserable-looking fellow by the name of Phoefius, who stood cowering in the corner with a Julius Caesar pendant around his neck, a marriage ring on his finger, a gold band around one arm, and a 200-foot statue of a swan behind his back. Ugh, said Phoefius. Caecilius's suspicious eye just landed on me. He flicked his eye away, and it went bouncing around the walls for a couple of minutes, and nearly got eaten by the vulture, until luckily it pinged back into Caecilius's head just in time, as he had been about to give up hope, and replaced it with an egg. Stop trying to distract us, Phoefius, said Caecilius, advancing on the hapless creature. It seems that you must be the thief, because, for a start, your name is Phoefius. And also, you seem to have all the objects that have gone missing on or about your person. But I did not do it, said Phoefius, backing away. For although Phoefius is my name, I am an honest man. And also, you know, all these objects, the Julius Caesar pendant, the golden armband, the marriage ring, and the 200-foot statue of a swan, well, I came about each of them legitimately, and I have a good explanation for them all. Then, let's hear your stories, Phoefius, said Caecilius, for I am not only a fart merchant, I have just remembered that I am the Lord High Judge of Pompeii. If your story rings true, then you shall be spared prison. But if they sound like lies, then you shall be spared prison. So either way I am spared prison, said Phoefius. Oh, no, sorry, said Caecilius. That was a mistake. If your story sounds like lies, then you shall not be spared prison at all. You shall have penalty of prison. Okay, that makes a lot more sense, said Phoefius, and he leant back on the floor and shot all the bones out of his body so that he was just a big floppy mess of skin and eyes on the floor. My first story is how I came by the Julius Caesar pendant, said Phoefius, as his bones danced around the baths. No one really knew why, but it was fun to watch. And here is my story right now. Yes, right now. I am just carrying on talking because we've got a little bit more space to fill at the end of this paragraph, and I quite like my story to be nice and neatly on the next page. Yes, Caecilius, here comes my full story right about nearly there now. And we'll come back to this in my next reading.